Hello, everybody. Welcome. 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 My name is Valerie Ashby, and I am Dean of Trinity College of Arts and Sciences. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout here for this event today to hear Eddy Cue speak. There's so much energy in the room. I see people running from outside to get in, so this is fabulous. So welcome to you. Apple is a company that takes risks, that solves problems with such creativity that they actually redefine the course of technology development. It is a company that strives to continuously try new approaches to push the limits and to challenge assumptions. Apple has often been a game changer in the technology world, which makes it fitting that Apple executive Eddy Cue, who is also a Duke Computer Science alum, is here this afternoon to help us celebrate the successful launch of the Duke Technology Scholars Program. DTech, as we call it, is a comprehensive effort to inspire more Duke undergraduates to choose careers in computer science and electrical and computer engineering. We piloted the program in 2016 with the goal of creating a pipeline of individuals who will thrive in technology, a field that is an integral part of our society and economy. Duke is strategically investing in computing, and diversity in particular is an important part of our plan to broaden participation in computing at Duke and to impact the national workforce demographics in technology. The DTech program is a shining realization of the partnership between Trinity College of Arts and Sciences and Pratt School of Engineering, and I'd like to recognize Dean Ravi Bellamkonda, who is sitting in the front here, who's my partner in crime, as Dean of Pratt School of Engineering. This is also a wonderful collaboration between the departments of computer science, and I see Pankaj Agarwal, who's chair of computer science, and electrical and computer engineering, and Krish is not here, he's traveling, but he would be here, who's also chair of electrical and computer engineering. DTech is built around the idea that relationships, mentorship, and hands-on experience make the difference in recruiting and retaining women and underrepresented people in technology fields. In the summer of 2016, we placed 10 undergraduate women in 6 companies in Silicon Valley for paid technological internships. In 2017, we more than tripled our program size with 34 women at 23 companies, and we believe that we will continue to grow. Groups of DTech scholars live together throughout the summer, sharing experiences and learning together and participating in summer programming and with technology industry leaders. The program provides personal and professional development workshops and leadership training to help each DTech scholar extend her individual technical skills and build confidence. Extensive professional networking helps our scholars envision and launch rewarding tech careers. The DTech program is a game changer for undergraduates interested in careers in technology, and it is a game changer for the tech industry as the response to our scholars has been phenomenal. And now let me briefly introduce DTech scholar Divya Koyala Gunta. I think I did that pretty well, Divya. Divya will graduate this spring and is majoring in computer science with minors in neuroscience and chemistry. She is just brilliant and is excited, and it's exciting to see how much she has engaged in her time at Duke. She served as an undergraduate teaching assistant for Computer Science 101, Intro to Programming, and CS 201, Data Structures and Algorithms. She has conducted computational neuroscience research in Duke's Department of Neurobiology. She has been captain of the Duke Dhamaka, is that right? Competitive dance team, as well as a policy executive at the National Alliance of Mental Illness at Duke. She has also been a group leader in the Females Excelling More in Math, Engineering, and Sciences program. Please join me in welcoming Divya to the podium to introduce our speaker, Eddy Cue.
Thank you, Dean Ashby, for that extremely kind introduction. It's with great honor that I introduce to you today Eddy Cue. Eddy Cue got his bachelor's degrees in computer science and economics right here at Duke University in '86, and is now the senior vice president of internet software and services at Apple. He's been at Apple for 29 years, where he's been instrumental in creating the Apple Online Store, iTunes Store, and then the App Store. And most importantly, he is Duke's #1 basketball fan on the West Coast. We're really fortunate to have Duke alums such as Eddy Cue who come here to support Duke programs and students. And with that, I'd like to welcome Eddy Cue to the stage.
Thanks. I do want to make one correction. It is not just in the West Coast, it's in the world. Around that. It's great to be here. I think one of the things that I am most impressed and most in awe whenever I come to Duke, and having spent a day here and with a lot of students, is I feel really lucky that I applied and came here 30 years ago, because I wouldn't get in today. Because you guys are so brilliant at the stuff that you do. When you hear a resume like that, I'd like to have that resume now. And what you guys are able to accomplish is really, really incredible. Somebody was asking me what do I feel when I was walking around Duke today, and I said it's like, well, one, it feels very new, because there's so much new stuff all the time whenever you come here that's changed from the time that I was here. Two, you reminisce about it, and three, I'm envious. Because I would trade places with any of you to be able to come back and be able to do it again. Duke, and I'll give you a little bit of background, but Duke really changed my life in a huge, huge way. My parents are immigrants. My parents came from Cuba, and from my dad's family's from Spain. And I was first generation, born in the US, first kid to go to college from that standpoint. And so I live the American dream. This is what's possible in America when you can have somebody come from another country and be able to do that. And obviously, in today's time with things going on, you can see how important that is to have that opportunity. And so I'm very, very thankful for that, around that. But Duke changed my life in a huge way, because I came here and I grew up. And you grow up when you go to college. And I actually met my wife here. And she's sitting right here, Paula. And she was also a computer science major, so I'm sure there's not that many people that have met two computer science majors at Duke at the same time that got married together. So obviously that was a big change. And you know, I'm very lucky, because I went to the best university in the world for 4 years, and then I've been able to work at the best company in the world for 29 years. That makes it very, very special. We'll talk about that in a second and talk a little bit about Apple. But the other part of it where it changed my life is we had 3 kids. And we have 2 sons. One's that's 26, the other one's 24. And of course, they went to Duke. Everybody always says, boy, aren't you lucky that your kids picked Duke? And I said, no, I'm lucky that my kids think they picked Duke. And so I brainwashed them early. And we have a third that now knows the secret, who's here. She's actually just a sophomore in high school. Her name's Samantha. And that I hope one day could be in this audience as a student. No pressure around that. But you know, I got started from Duke, and when I graduated, I basically went out straight to California to work at Apple. And in those days, I was laughing, because we were kind of talking about with some of the CS students here about when I went to school, you know, and asked me, well, didn't you have a computer? And it's like, no, you don't have computers back then. You had to go to the lab, and there was 2 labs in Duke, and that's how it kind of worked and all that. But I learned a program, and I knew, and this is like the most important thing, the most valuable lesson in life. I was very lucky to find the thing that I love to do very early. And I knew right away, I wanted to be an architect my whole life. I grew up with a drafting table in my room. I used to, draw houses and do all that kind of stuff. And I was a sure thing gonna be an architect. But I got a hold of a computer. And in those days, a computer was not what it is today. It wasn't a tool that you used. And if you wanted to run a program, you had to type it in and actually compile it and actually run it. So you had to learn basically how to program in order to use a computer. And the moment I did that, I fell in love with it. And so I got to find the thing I love. And that's the thing that's most important in life, because if you find the thing you love, I haven't worked at Apple for 29 years. If you do the math, 29 years, and you kind of do the number of days I've worked, I probably worked for about a year. The other 28 years, it wasn't work. It was just what I love to do. And so most days I don't think of it as work. It's not. I wake up, I'm as excited today as I was 20 years ago, and I'm excited about what we're doing. And I get up in the morning and I get going, and I hate sleep because I always look at sleep as losing time. I could be doing other things to get things done, and so sleep sort of slows you down in doing that. And that's because you love what you do. If you love what you do, that's what you have to find. Because it does change your life, and you look at it, I think, very, very differently. I was very lucky to do that in finding Apple, but I learned a few things along the way, and I'll talk a little bit about career paths and different things. When I first started at Apple back in those days, it was the days of laser printers, and before that there were dot matrix printers, and laser printers came out and it created this revolution called desktop publishing. So now instead of printing presses, you could do this kind of stuff. And when I went to Apple, Apple was making money left and right. I was young, just out of school. My first day on the job, turns out it's a week before the quarter end. And my manager walks up to me and says, "Hey, we got too much money in our budget. Order as much of anything you can think of. Order it for yourself so that you have your office all set up," or whatever from that standpoint. So I ordered a scanner, color printer, everything I could order from that standpoint. And you don't realize it at the time, but that was a dead giveaway that the company was not being managed very well, if you think about it logically. But like all things, when you're making a ton of money, you don't realize it. Because if things are growing from that standpoint, right, you can mismanage things for a long time, and you don't really realize it from that because you're still making more money. It's only when things get tough that now you realize, and you've got a problem. And it's a real problem, because once you're mismanaging things for years, you can't just turn that around in that space. And so, very quickly, within about a 2-year window when I got there, today the margins in hardware are about in the 30s. If you're really good like us, most people's margins in hardware are in the single digits. In those days, the margin was like 70, 80%. It was like software in a sense. So you sold hardware at just ridiculous prices. The most expensive computer I think I've ever bought was during that time frame. Even in real dollars, forget about adjusted dollars. You'd have to pay $3,000, $4,000 for a computer back then. And so, during those 2 years, I was learning how to program and working in a company. It was a large company, but not that large. In times, it was about 5,000 or 6,000 people. Today, we have about 130 to 140,000 people. That doesn't include most of our outsourced manufacturing, where we have more than 1 million people working for us. In those days, half the company was manufacturing. So there was the real company of the engineers, and in Cupertino was only about 2,000 to 3,000 people. So it was relatively small in the scheme of things. But as I said, it was being mismanaged, and sure enough, within 2 years, it hit a point where the products weren't as good. And then I got a second valuable lesson. And the second valuable lesson is, if you hire a bozo as a CEO, everybody they hire below them is even worse. And so we hired a big bozo as a CEO. His name's Gil Emilio, who should have never been a CEO. He wasn't qualified to be. He was qualified to be a first-line manager, never CEO from that standpoint. And then everybody that he hired was just that much worse. And that trickle effect going down the corporation is a disaster. And that's where leadership at the top really matters. And you see it at Duke when you bring somebody great at any position of leadership, everybody they bring below them is really usually pretty good. And when it's not, it goes the other way around. And that's why one of the most important things about leadership is. And if somebody were to ask me what's the most important thing that I do, it's hiring. Because whoever you work with is going to determine in many ways how good or bad you are. And if they're really good, they're going to make you look better than you are. Reason I'm standing here today. Because I work with a lot of people that are really, really good at what they do, and they make me look a lot better than I am. When you're really bad, when they're really bad, they make you look a lot worse than you are. But then it doesn't matter. No one's going to look at it that way. And so, we hired, and for 2 years he was there, and I came very close to leaving Apple. You say, so, well, if that's going on, you kind of knew that, well, why don't you leave Apple? But I was working on a cool project at the time, and I said, well, when this project ends, I'm gone. And by the way, to go back in history, when I graduated from Duke, there were two companies that I really looked to work for that I interviewed with. One was Apple and the other one was Microsoft. If you think I took Apple, for a very long time, that looked like a very bad decision on the part of choosing Apple. Microsoft went like this, and Apple went kind of like that around it. But so I was working on projects that I liked, and so that made me stay there. And then something magical happened. I got to work with Albert Einstein, Alexander Graham Bell, whatever you want to name in history, and his name was Steve Jobs. He came back, it's been almost 20 years, and when he came back to Apple, I knew about Steve from being a kid, because when I was a kid, I wanted an Apple II. I could never get my dad to buy me an Apple II because his time was $2,000, and he was like, he was a blue collar worker, and I didn't have that much money saved, and he was like, I'm not buying you a $2,000 game machine, which in today's time is probably about $10,000 or $12,000, so you can understand. At the time, I didn't quite understand it as well, but I understand it today. But from those days, I always admired Steve, and so when I got to meet Steve and got to work with him, it was a dream come true. So you kind of look at my career, and I dreamed about working for Apple. I dreamed about being involved with Steve, and I got to live my dream around it. And so I met Steve, and the company wasn't doing very well. It had lost $2 billion in a year. And you say, well, it's not that big a deal. But it is, because you're trying to make money. And so if you're not trying to give it away, it's hard. It's actually really, really hard to lose $2 billion when you're trying to make money. You have to execute flawlessly in a negative way around it. For most of you, you guys are young enough, you think of Apple as a huge success. I mean, Apple was bankrupt. Literally bankrupt. You lose $2 billion. We had no money in the bank from that standpoint. We had to borrow money to keep the company going. Scott McNeely, who used to run Sun Microsystems, made a comment at the time, I remember really well, where he said, what Apple should do is sell off all the assets and return, actually, let me be fair, that's another person, I'm going to tell that story in a second, but what he said was the stock was at like $10 or $9 or something like that. In those days, obviously pre-split, so it's probably like 20 cents today, but and he said, I would offer like $7 for Apple, basically less than the stock was trading, because that's all it's worth around it. So Steve comes back on board, and luckily I got to meet him within a few weeks. Part of the way I got to meet him, and this is another part of the story about how when you look at your careers and you don't know how things are going to work out, no matter how well you plan them. I started being a programmer. One of the things that I liked about Apple and that I was willing to do is I was willing to always try new things, different things, many things I wasn't qualified for, honestly, that I should have never gotten the job or the opportunity to do, but I was given the opportunity, and I always took it on straight on. I got to run a 24/7 call center for a couple of years. I didn't know anything about running a call center. I didn't even, I went to the first meeting. They're all talking about ACD this, ACD that, and I was like, what the hell's an ACD? And it's like an automatic call distributor. It's the thing that transfers all the calls between all the agents, but having never done it, you don't know anything about it. But I was always willing to try new things. And I've had many, many career paths at Apple because of that, and I think that has allowed me to be where I am, because I got a reputation of somebody who was willing to do new things, was quick, fast learner, and could really execute. And so in some cases, I'm sure sometimes maybe they thought I was the best person. Maybe the other times they thought, well, we don't have anybody else. Let's give him a shot, because he's been able to be successful at most of the things he's done around it. So you have some of that. But you build a reputation about yourself as somebody like that. And so one of the things I decided to do is, back in the day, sort of in the internet was, what's the internet? No, it didn't exist actually, and it was just starting to come out, and I thought it was something really cool. Didn't know that much about it, but I thought it was pretty cool, and I wanted to get involved in it. And so one of the things that I figured out to get involved with was I decided to take a job in HRIT. And so you go, okay, programmer, I've done support, I've done call centers, HRIT, here's the career path is just going straight up, right? That's not the way most people would picture it. Tracy's a good friend of mine who runs the IT organization at Duke. And IT is one of those places where most people don't know who you are until there's a problem. Then everybody knows who you are. You do a great job, but it's kind of a thankless job because you have to do it behind the scenes around it. So you say, okay, so I take a job at HRT, but the reason I did that was because I wanted to get involved in moving all of Apple's systems for employees onto the internet. And I thought if I did that, I get to do and learn a lot about the internet as part of the real thing and get to know that. Steve comes on board basically right after I've done that, and he decides to, he wants to build an online store. And in those days, nobody sold their products direct. You sold them through distributors and stores, right? There were stores. There's a big store here in Durham called CompUSA that was right where the mall was, and there were small computer stores. And so we sold 100% of our products through computer stores. At that point, Dell had started, and Dell was selling only direct and not through computer stores. And Steve came back to Apple and said, besides all these other changes I'm making, one of the changes I'm making is we're going to go direct around it. And so Steve asked the IT person, hey, can you bring the best person in that you think should lead the project? And I was, one level manager. I was way down the organization from that. And I don't think the IT person, who I know very well, said, okay, as soon as bring your best person, the next thing out of his mouth was, we're bringing in Eddy. That wasn't his thought pattern. I'm sure he may not say that today, but the reason was because Steve at the time, and I think kind of related to the discussion that I said, his perspective of coming into Apple was everyone's a bozo until proven otherwise, because we had a lot of them. And so you had to prove yourself, right? So you had to come in and prove yourself. And so it was tough to prove yourself against him because his bar was really, really high. And so when he thought, okay, who am I going to bring in here who might be able to take this? I think that was the part that I came in where, okay, he can probably handle that part of it and deal with Steve pretty well around it. And I met Steve, and it's a story that I'm not going to repeat because we're on camera and I don't really like the story getting repeated, but nonetheless, it didn't go well around the meeting. And pretty much through about half the meeting, I thought I was getting fired. One of the things that you do, and this is, you kind of learn a few things. So you're going to meet with somebody that you're trying to tell them about yourself and what you're going to do. So first thing I decided to do is do a little homework and find out how does Steve like things getting presented to him, right? So don't walk into a place without knowing as much as you can about it. And it sounds pretty basic, and who doesn't do that? Turns out lots of people don't do that. They don't really do a little bit of homework to kind of prepare themselves for what they're going to go do. So I do a little homework about it. And one of the things is that you go and meet people that he's worked with before and learn. And I was told, he's a very visual person. He doesn't like wire diagrams. He doesn't like slide after slide from that standpoint. He really likes to see visually what it is you're going to create or touch from that standpoint. So I'm like, great, I'll do that. So I know how to lay out what I think a store is going to look like. And, it sounds all basic, but in those days there weren't a lot of people doing this. So I said, well, let me go find a designer who's actually worked with Steve, because that way that person knows his taste, and now I'm going to have this great thing. And it's a guy named Dan Marusic who's still, he works for me and has been with me throughout the whole time. And he does the designs, and we have this great layout or whatever. I then decide, well, let me go see the vice president of sales, who's going to be in the meeting because it's going to be the executive team. And I go talk to him, and he's like, yeah, he goes, I tell him what I'm doing, and he says, yeah, you're doing a good job. I think that's really good, but don't worry that much about it because we're really not going to do this. because he goes, we sell all our stuff direct, so we really can't do this from that standpoint. And so that's kind of my prep to the meeting. Walked into the meeting, Steve says, what do you got? I show him the diagrams of the things that the pictures, not the diagrams, because there were graphics of how it's laid out. He looks at them and kind of tosses them back at me and says, these suck. And of course, right away, I'm like smart. I'm like, okay, well, Steve, I worked with Dan, who I knew he knew, so I throw Dan under the bus right away, right? To make sure that he knew that I had worked with somebody he knew. But we go through the meeting, and it, like I said, it didn't go very well at all, and all that standpoint. But we got to some point in the meeting where, and one of the things, if you haven't figured out by now, I don't have a problem talking. Somebody asked, I said, how long is this? He said an hour. I said, are you guys going to do Q&A today? And he says, yeah, we'd love to do Q&A. And he says, well, how long would you like to talk? I go, well, I'm Spanish. I could talk for a day. So so I talk a lot. And so I had interrupted Steve a couple times, not on purpose. I thought he had finished, hadn't actually finished. That was a problem around it. But we had a guy, and I noticed in the meeting, and it's the executive team at Apple at the time, I noticed that the person who was the head of sales had never really said anything about we're not doing it. He had been quiet, and he had been with Steve for a long time. And then there was a person at Ops who, about 2/3 through the meeting, basically makes the comment and says, hey, Steve, it's great. We've been out here for an hour talking about this, and it's wonderful and all this stuff, but I mean, come on, we're not going to do this. We sell all our stuff through the channel, and the channel, if we do this, the channel's going to walk. Smart guy that I am, I decided to answer the question, even though it was proposed to Steve. I thought I had a great answer. And I won't say what I said, but guess what? I did have a great answer. And Steve turned around, and after having had a very negative, all these things, he turns around, he looks at me, he says, you're right, looks at the head of ops and goes, you're wrong. And basically because you had, and my answer was related to the fact that we were losing $2 billion. I mean, it's not exactly like we were doing great work and knew exactly what to do. We had to change around it. And that's how I met Steve, and I got to now work with Steve for, a 20-year period around it. And I learned some things that are interesting for you guys. By this time, I'm 30 years old. I think when you're 30 years old, certainly I thought I knew every skill set and talent that I had. At least the core pieces of it. You figure by this point you've been to college, you've learned a bunch of things, you've been at work, you've learned a bunch of things, you've tried different things. I said I had tried all these different things. But one of the best talents I had, I didn't even know I had, even at that point. And for whatever reason, Steve was the type of individual that could see that in people and see things that you probably couldn't see in yourself, and certainly other people couldn't see in themselves. And one of the things that he saw in me was that, or at least saw enough to give me the opportunity, was he thought I could negotiate well. Now, I graduated with a computer science degree. I worked as a programmer, running call centers, HRIT. Typically, that's not the path to negotiation. I worked a lot, and I used to like working in computers in my own room and my own thing, and so you don't think of it in that way. I was out, I could speak and do things, but I had never really negotiated anything, in that time. But Steve saw something in it and said, all right, well, I want you to go do, he wanted to change music at the time, and we went and did these deals with the labels, and later on we wanted to change the phone industry. And we had to go deal with the carriers and doing the phones. And just to give you a perspective of the iPhone that you have today, which is hard to believe, it's only 10 years old. So 10 years ago, it didn't exist. And it's hard to imagine today what you would do in your life without it, but it didn't exist 10 years ago. And when we designed the iPhone, we knew what we wanted to do. And it looked a lot, it really looked a lot like iPhone 10, by the way. We just couldn't do iPhone 10 years ago. It took us 10 years to get all the technology and all the things we wanted. So we had to do some other things to get there. But it still was pretty good. And when we were going to the carriers to go do an iPhone, in those days, the carriers had a book about this thick with the specifications of how you could build a phone. And so, for example, a phone had to have physical buttons It had to have certain, buttons on the sides. It had to do all these things that they had a requirement of, which, of course, if you think of the iPhone, it had none of those things around it. They had control of the software of when it got updated. The App Store was theirs. All of these different things, which we, of course, said no to, and we're not going to do this. So you go to all these carriers, and they all tell you to pound sand. And so my job was to go get a carrier to go do this. And so I ended up doing some of the biggest negotiations for Apple's history, from music to carriers to movies to TV shows to different things, which isn't important. What is important is the fact that it was a skill set that I had that I didn't even know I had. So don't believe that you may not discover some things that you're really good at until very later in life. It doesn't always happen very quickly. Sometimes things happen really fast, and sometimes happen really slowly. In my career path, promotions and things, sometimes it's been faster and sometimes it's been slower. Faster than I deserved, some cases maybe slower than I deserved in other cases. It just doesn't always line up perfectly, and you can't always create a path. You just have to be willing to make sure you're doing the things that you love, the things that you like. If you don't, then you change the path. But other than that, you kind of lead the path and you try to lead it the way you want, and usually it gets you to the right place if you're loving what you're doing and doing that. And I got to do that with Steve and learn that. Obviously, to be at Apple over this period of time from going bankrupt, there's a great story. Coach Cut, a long time ago, is coaching Duke football when he first got here. And for those of you that have followed Duke football younger, or certainly done any history, we were in the top 10. The top 10 worst teams in the country. Year in and year out. There were a couple seasons there where we went like winless. We win one game. If we won two, it was like, quad celebration. Let's do a bonfire. It's like winning a national championship in basketball if you won 2 games in football, right? And Coach Cutt and I were talking about stuff and talking about motivation. I said, it's interesting. I said, if you had asked me 20 years ago, would I walk on the moon, or would Apple be the largest company in the world, I would have walked on the moon like 100 times. It's not even close from that standpoint. So when somebody says, can Duke football win a national championship? That's way easier than becoming the largest company in the world or walking on the moon. And so sure, it's possible, right? And we're talking to Coach Cut, he loved the story, right? So he uses it with his players and it's true. And we haven't won a national championship yet, but by the way, we didn't become the largest company in the world or as successful overnight either. I said it was a 20-year period. For the first 10 years of that, neither Wall Street nor customers nor anything viewed Apple as anything more than just barely surviving. It took a very, very long time to turn it around. Now, hopefully it's not going to take Coach Cut 20 years. And he's certainly going at a faster pace than we are. Hopefully tonight he can make that 5-0 and be an even faster pace on doing that. But it's kind of a reminder of what's possible. And when I look at the world today, that's the coolest thing about what you guys have is the opportunity. Everybody, always focuses on the problems. And everybody's, the world's, especially people that are older. And someday I'm sure I'll do this too. But I try not to be exactly like my dad, even though you just turn out to be. Everything your dad tells you that he just doesn't understand, he's actually about 80% right. You're just not going to figure it out for 30 years. But you do this and it's one of those things where you kind of have to go along and trust the path that you're going on. And it can lead you to just amazing things. And working at Apple certainly has been that. I'm very, very lucky to do that. As I said, that's kind of my career path in doing this. One of my interests and why I'm excited and really why I'm here today is DTech. And it's weird. And my wife said this too. So I met my wife in computer science here in a computer class. It was actually an electrical engineering class that I met her. And I didn't think of women in technology as something unusual or different because heck, I mean, I met my wife here. She went to work at Apple. I went to work at Apple. We've always been involved in tech, so it's not that unusual or different. The thing that changed me and made me realize the world in a different way was having a daughter. And so having Samantha brought a different perspective, because I got to see my sons and my daughter go to school at the same times, roughly, right? And see what's different, what's the same, what are the opportunities that are granted to each from that standpoint. And I really saw some differences that I didn't like, that I didn't think were going to give her the same opportunities that my sons had. And that's what's exciting about DTech, and really providing an opportunity and realizing that there's some great things that can be done, and everyone should have the opportunity to do that. I've learned, people look at the world and look at different people, and today the world is pretty screwed up in that way. But every single person, every human has a skill set that's unique and that's really good. Just very few people get the opportunity to discover it, find it, as I said, and be able to use it. But everybody has it. I've never met anybody, I can't draw worth a crap. When I said I wanted to be an architect, well, I could, because that had rulers, drafting table, and I could do that. I couldn't draw the 3D perspective of the house. I could draw the flat, architectural diagram of a house, but I could never draw. You look at a musician, you look at an actor, you look at, my father was an electrician. Everybody has certain skill sets. You just have to be able to discover them and find them, and hopefully they get the opportunity to do that. And that's what most people in the world don't have around it. And so when we look at DTech, it's not as tough as, let's be honest, it's not as tough as when we look at this in a global scale, but it's a problem we have, and we want to do something about it and make it so that women have the same opportunity. When you look at technology in the field today, we look at Apple as an example, and we're just not diverse enough. And it's not diverse for being diverse. It has nothing to do with that. That doesn't really work. I'll give you another difference. When I started at Apple, 70% of our sales were in the US, 30% were international. Very US focused company. Today, that number is the complete opposite. Today, the biggest country in the world for sales of iPhones and iPad, it's not the US, it's China. We sell more iPhones and iPads in China. And so the world becomes, it's been great because the world is more one place, and that you can now do all these things around the world. But it also means that you need to understand, the whole world, not just your neighborhood, your thing. And in Silicon Valley, one of the challenges, it's great that we're doing the reverse of trying to bring some students into Silicon Valley. The negative of Silicon Valley is that it's a bubble, right? You live in a place where it's all tech, everybody has high speed, there's a lot of money, there's a lot of all these, the education system is pretty damn good. So you don't really, the crime is really low. You don't see a lot of the problems that you do. And so if you're working there and you're trying to create products and you're thinking about the whole world, if you want to be a great company around the whole world, you better be damn diverse. Because if all you're seeing is the few things in front of you, you're going to have a real problem around it. And your products aren't going to be as good in doing that. And so that's why it's important if you want to look at it from a company point of view. It's obviously important from a humanity point of view. But if you just look at it from a company, which, we've had these questions asked by shareholders, well, why are you spending money doing things that are green? Why are you doing something for diversity? Why would you be investing in DTech? From an investor point of view, because it's damn good for the company. Not because it's good for humanity. That happens to be a side thing that's great to do it for, but for those guys, they don't care. They just want the return on the investment. And so the reason we're doing it is because it is good for the company. It just happens to be good for both around that. And that's an important aspect that people just don't think about. Everybody tries to do it as, we don't like this quote, or we don't like this, or no, it's about that. It's about making it so that the company can be much better and much more successful. And by the way, it's great for humanity, which is good. that's kind of an overview, and I want to open it up to some questions because otherwise I'll just keep talking, and I got a lot of stories. We can talk about Coach K. You know that he's got the second best winning percentage at Duke. One of the other benefits of coming to Duke is some of your best friends are lifelong friends that are here, and a few of them are here, and Jeff and Mike Craig, and then there's others like Meredith. Who's laughing now? But no, and so Coach has got a hell of a winning percentage. But one thing that I did one year is I got to be an assistant coach for a Duke game, and we won. So I'm 1-0. I got 1,000%. My average margin of victory is 42, and Coach is just right there below me. So we're in good shape. I try to remind Coach of that all the time. In that he's got a great winning percentage. It's not quite as good as mine. But I'd love to open it up to some questions.
Thank you so much. That was, I know what you mean when you say you know how to talk. So we have time for questions. So there's mics floating around. So if you raise your hand. Perhaps we'll start over here, and then we'll go back and forth.
Oh, am I starting? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, we'll start while the mic is getting there.
Whoever the mic is.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Q. So I wanted to ask, how does Apple define its role as a corporate citizen and balance the responsibilities between shareholders, governments, and consumers?
Well, you heard a little bit about it, and probably you could tell I got a little emotional because it matters a lot. We viewed Apple as a different company. We've said we are at the cross sections of art and technology. I think one of the attributes that we look for in students and in the people that work for us is not just the technology part, but the arts part. Because the products that we're creating, I think, are different. They're not just technological problems. We're trying to make, we do think that we can help make the world a better place. And we're not going to cure cancer. Hopefully Duke Medicine will do that. But hopefully we can give the tools to Duke Medicine to be able to do that around it. And so that we aspire to, and so we think of it in those ways. And sometimes it happens without us knowing, right? The iPad has turned out to be one of the greatest devices for autism. We didn't design the iPad with that in mind. It was a coincidence. But now that we know it, then you start evolving and trying to do something about it. We're doing some great studies actually with Duke around autism, where we can actually take a phone and through a game detect whether somebody has autism or not. Not as important maybe if you live here, but if you're living in a third world country where you don't have access to a doctor and things like that, you can do diagnosis and things like that. So we value that part of it. Second of all, we've taken the position that I think when you become a really large company like we are, and sometimes we like this and other times it just doesn't feel as good, honestly, the expectations about us are raised to a level beyond anybody else. That's true of Duke basketball. It's true of Duke to some extent too. You have expectations like, you could never imagine that, Duke basketball can be involved with, funneling money down the side, to players through Adidas or Nike or something like that. You just the ethics and the belief that the program and the school has just wouldn't allow that. I checked with Coach, by the way. We're good. Just in case, you never. But so you have to really look at the things that are important to you, and so people expect us to hold very high standards, and we like that. Second of all, we're okay with it. We like that, and we believe in it. Second of all, we hate people that copy us. As you know, we've been very vocal about that. Everyone should do their own engineering. There's plenty of things to invent, plenty of ways to design things. You don't need to copy us. On the social side, copy away. Make all your factories green, make all your stores green like we do. Make all your products as recyclable as possible. Those are all things that we do. Ultimately, if we do those things right, what's good for the environment, what's good for that is good for business. We're not doing it. You can't do the two things and say, well, I'm going to do things that are terrible for business and do that, because then you're going to have shareholders, that do that. No, we do things that are the right things to do, and ultimately they're going to be good for the company. Sometimes it's not directly one day to the next, but they're not. And we have a leader in Tim Cook who has been willing to put himself out there. And it's hard to do social issues when you're a public company and when you're large, because people should have differences of opinions, and those are healthy, and having discussions around that. But when you're a company, you generally don't like aligning yourself with anything because you don't want to upset any other customer from doing that. But we've decided that there are certain things, and the most basic ones that we are willing to go to the mat with is anything related to human rights. And so we've stood for that, and we said, look, if you don't like what we're doing for human rights and you're going to stop buying our products, sorry, we can't do something like that. And that takes leadership. You got to have somebody who's willing to really believe in that and take the arrows that you take with it and things to that nature. Ultimately, I think you win. It just may not always feel that way. But you pick the things that you can make a difference on and that you believe in, and hopefully as a company you do that. And as companies have gotten larger, I think there's just bigger demands of that. Today, CEOs of companies and people like myself talking to you, unfortunately have become more important talking about these issues sometimes than our politicians, who don't seem to be able to get a lot of things done from either side. And so CEOs and companies have had to stand up and go like, no, this is the right way to do things. And hopefully that helps around it.
This side here.
Hi, Mr. Q. So obviously, Apple is a great leader in the world for innovation and everything, and we all know that you've led the creation of online stores and the App Store. Can you talk a little bit about the experience of thinking of the new ideas and the obstacles that come in the way, kind of the more creativity and entrepreneurship side?
Yeah, great question. Everybody always wants to know, how does Apple innovate? We drink a lot of smart water, which this isn't, but no. But, one of probably the most valuable lesson that I learned from Steve is the most important thing you can do in the world is say no. And that's focus. It's really hard to focus in life. There's so many things going on, so many things that you can do, so many, and when we were smaller, for example, and we were coming just out of basically just surviving, it's kind of easy to say no. Because you can't say yes, because you don't have the resources, you don't have the money, you don't have anything. As you get bigger and bigger, now you have all these capabilities, and it gets really, really hard to say no. And in order, at least for us, to be great at the things that we do, we only know how to do that with a few things. We don't know how to be great at a lot of things, or at least what we think is great. And that means it's about focus and saying no. So the first thing we do to get to our products being great is all about saying no, 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 and you have to fight for everything till you say yes. Now, the reason it works at Apple is because we're very good at fighting and arguing and all that standpoint, but once we decide that we're going that way, everybody gets on board and goes that way. We fight all before that, we get the fight over with, and then everybody goes that way. That's hard in a large company. Most large companies, what you have is you end up having somebody who goes that way, the other person goes that way, and so we've been able to stay really, really focused. The other piece is, as you get bigger and you have a lot of money, not only can you do more, but you think you can do more because you've had a lot of success. So, you look at something else and you look at it and you go, well, how hard is that? And if they do it really well, most things look easy when they do it really well. We've been pretty good about not getting into areas that we don't have any knowledge or expertise. And then in a few times, we do get into some areas where we're not really knowledgeable. And I'll give you two examples. One that's current right now, you're just about to see the beginnings of it. And maybe next time I come back, if I'm back, you'll know it worked. If I'm not back, then you'll know it didn't work. We wanted to get into the retail business to do the Apple stores. And at the time, going into retail, it's kind of like you think of it today. Why would you ever go into retail with Amazon? In those days, it was kind of the same thing. It was, doing a computer store was what it was the old days. That was CompUSA and the Byte store and the computer shop. Those things were all dying. Why would you ever go into that? But our vision of it was very different. We envisioned that our products are different, and so they're not commodities. They're products you have to touch and feel and see in order to buy them. And we couldn't be in a position where it's like, here's a Windows machine, here's another Windows machine, here's a Mac, and here's another Windows machine. And you go ask the person, oh, I want to buy the Mac, and because he's getting spiffed by some, buddies, don't buy the Mac, buy the Windows machine. This thing is much better and cheaper. And we didn't, it just wasn't going to work for us. So we decided we're going to do that. Well, we went and hired an expert. We went and hired somebody from Target who was really good at retailing to help us build the stores. Now, you had to hire someone who was an expert, but that actually was willing to do things differently, because we weren't going to do the same thing that Target was doing or the same things. And today, I'm still surprised that you walk into I look at an Apple store, every person can check you out. You can check out yourself with your own, if you have a phone from that standpoint. We don't spiff the person to sell. No individual in our store is compensated based on their sales. They get any bonuses based on the sales of the store. So it's a team effort, not an individual effort. You never walk into our stores, which if you've ever had this happen to you, you walk in to buy something, if it's a big ticket item and you're not ready to buy and you go, I'll come back tomorrow, and the person says, well, don't come back tomorrow because I'm off. Can you come back the next day? You don't have any of that. And so we did that, and so you go and hire expertise in a few areas where you think, okay, I can make a big difference around it. And we did that in retail. I mean, you return a product at Apple, why do you need a receipt? I mean, they scanned it all in and into a computer, and then you come back and you're like, if you don't have a receipt, well, we can't do it, or we can only give you store credit, or they come up with a million excuses, right? You walk into an Apple store, you walk in and for some reason it's one of those 1 in a billionth that doesn't work. You come return it, the person goes to the shelf, scans it, and hands it to you, and you're like, wait, where's the fight? I'm ready. And so you do those types of things. A newer example is we decided that there's some opportunities in the video space, most recently, and we went, and we don't know how to make anything in video. We don't know how to make a movie, we don't know how to make TV shows, we don't know how to make content from that standpoint, but we have some ideas of things that we can bring to the table from a technology point of view in other ways that we think can be differentiated, but we need somebody to do that. So we went and hired what I think are two of the best people in Hollywood. Two individuals I just hired that are from Sony at the time, and they just came on board about 2 months ago, and we're off doing that business. So we've said, okay, well, that's a new area. We're willing to take a risk, but we do 1 or 2 of those every couple of years, and that's it. Otherwise, focus, focus, focus. Say no, say no, say no. If you say no, it always works. The last thing I will tell you is, we talked about this earlier, we were talking, everybody says they're customer focused, and that's complete crap. There are very few companies in the world, and we were talking about it as Duke. So who's Duke's customer? You guys. It's not the faculty, it's not Coach K, it's not Coach Cut, it's not me as the alumni or any of that. You guys are the customers. And so the question is, when Duke makes a decision on anything, is the first priority you? If it is, then you're customer focused. And very few companies can do that, because what ends up happening is you have, and not to do anything if anybody here is a finance major, but you have a CFO who says you can't do that. There's financial implications for that. You have somebody else come in and say, you've got customer support issues if you do that. There's somebody else going, no, you can make, we can make a lot more money if we did it this way. And you have all of these other parameters that come in, or you decide your customer is some intermediary that's between you and the customer. Duke could say that its customers are the professors, and the professors have a customer called the student. And so I, as Duke, am going to do all the things to empower professors, and then it's their responsibility to do it with students. And that sounds reasonable. It's not, because the people making the decisions at the top are making the really important ones and the big ones. And so, from a company point of view, if you want to innovate and you want to do things, you've got to start with the customer, and you basically have to say, customers first. If it doesn't work for the customer, I don't care about anything else. First, it has to work for the customer. Then we can figure out everything else afterwards. But it's got to be customer first. And trust me, if you guys do that in your career, you will succeed. You may not succeed as fast sometimes or as slow or whatever around it, but you'll succeed. Because ultimately, if customers like what you're doing and they're buying or they're using what you're doing, you win.
Question from the center, perhaps.
So I think a lot of people have felt that innovation in the living room has kind of lagged behind a lot of the other innovation we've seen, like out of Apple. And as the person that's running iTunes and all that, what do you think is causing that lagging innovation in that area?
Innovation in the living room, yes, I agree with you. If you look, let's just deal with what's living room. The living room is your TV set, is what we're talking about in video. If you look today, there are a few things that are great, and then there's one thing that's really bad. We'll talk about the good things first, and then we'll talk about the bad things. The good thing is your TV is amazing. For under $1,000 bucks, you can get a 60-inch 4K HDR, Dolby Vision, HDR 10 TV set. It weighs nothing. You can hook it up on the wall. It's amazing, trust me. I used to have to pay, I can go back 30 years. It used to cost $500 to buy a Sony Trinitron 20-inch TV tube this big, right? So, and heavy. So technology has just gone amazing in that. Second of all, you can watch video all the time. You guys, some of you might actually be bored with what I'm talking about, and you're all sitting on your iPhone watching a video because it's accessible to you. An iPad, you can watch it anywhere you want. So that's awesome. And now we go to the other side and say, look at content. Well, when has content been better? I can watch every live sporting event around the world. It could be a dart throwing contest in Ireland. It's available somehow, right? You can watch it. If you want to watch scripted television, it's never been better. Today, you watch a show that's scripted, it's what the equivalent of a Hollywood movie was 10 years ago, from a actor quality, from a special effects quality, from a writer quality, from a director quality. I mean, the stuff is off the charts. You want to watch crap like, reality television. There's a reality television about every topic you can possibly think of, left-handed people that don't like to turn right. There's a reality show for that. And so the content's never been better. And so then you say, okay, well, given all that, what's wrong? Because today everybody says, most people get their content from cable and satellite providers, and yet their numbers are going down. And you're like, well, how can this be given that those are the parameters? Well, because there's this thing in the middle that's the UI called your cable box or satellite box. And that thing is pretty brain dead. It's really bad, really, really bad. It's not incented to be upgraded because they pay for it once and then you keep paying every month for the rest of your life. So the last thing they ever want to do is upgrade that box because it costs money. And it's based on a bunch of rights and issues that make no sense to any of us. It makes sense to me because I know the history of it. It makes no sense to you because you don't have any history with it. Why am I DVRing anything? It's the stupidest idea on the planet. Why do I have to decide, I want to record the Duke game tonight? And, if I forgot, I can't, I got to deal with it from that standpoint. I got to worry about when it ends. I got to worry that two things aren't recording. I mean, it's just crazy. The other part of it, let's deal with the reality. How many of you are watching commercials? Nobody likes commercials. That's just a fact of life. People are skipping them left and right, and people go to Netflix and HBO because they don't like commercials and they like going through the thing. Doesn't mean all commercials go away, but what's happened is all the money for television a lot of it comes through commercials if it's broadcast television. Over time, from when I started watching television to today, the number of ad units has kept increasing. So the experience of the customer sucks. I'm in North Carolina. I pay $200 for my cable and satellite because I subscribe to every damn channel, every damn program there is. I go to my hotel room here, or better yet, I'm staying at Meredith's house. It's much better, it's cheaper. Unfortunately, it doesn't have any hot water, but that's another story. But you go and you're going to watch television on your iPad, for example, from that provider, and you can't because you're out of the area. I'm paying you $200 a month. I mean, you give me access. If I'm on the moon, you give me access to it. Forget about whether I'm in North Carolina if I'm paying you $200 a month. That's the problem. How do you solve it? It's hard because It's similar to the cell phone market. Cell phone had a lot of those issues, but cell phone had one thing, it had an industry standard. And so when we did our first iPhone, we didn't do an iPhone for Florida and North Carolina. We did an iPhone that worked in the US, that worked in the UK, worked everywhere around the world pretty much. 80% of the world was doing that. And then the other 20% was using another standard. For all of this, everybody has a different standard. It's all very broken apart from that standpoint. So what happens? So what's happening is people are dropping their cable and satellite subscription, not by huge numbers today. You know, it's going down, but who wants to be in a business going down? You look at that, and others are coming in. Netflix comes in, Hulu comes in, Amazon comes in, HBO to some extent comes in, and they're building different types of services. And they're not, none of them are ideal from a customer point of view because it's still all very, very messy. But that's the reason why. So what's going to happen is this thing will play itself out way slower than we would like, way slower than we could fix it because of these dynamics. But rest assured, in the next 5 years, this thing is going to be completely different. We're not going to have the same discussions of all the crap that I just said around it. I wish you could do it faster because it's a great, when you have the screens, the access, and the content that's so good, it should be, the experience should be so magical. But it's not.
Well, on that note, we have a reception outside, so thank Eddy again. So it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank Sam for coming, and to all our DTech scholars, we're very, very proud of you, and we look forward to working with you and enabling your success. And
the last thing I'll leave you with, again, remember what I started with? Envious. You guys are in the position, you can change the world. You really can. I've been a part of it to a little bit, and you can do that. Today you're in a better position than ever. And I cut off the story, but you know, the world's in a great place. Yeah, there's always problems. When I was a kid, there was the Vietnam War. There's always crap going on. It's never perfect. But you're in a position because of technology, the world being much more open, communications, you guys can change the world. And that's a great position to be in. So you're, you know, do it. Thanks.
thank you so much. Thanks. Please join us for a reception outside. Thank you to all the faculty in the room and the students. Thank you for coming. Please join us outside. Thanks.